Communion is the practice of Christians sharing bread and wine. In this video, we are going to explore how the practice started, what it means, and why Christians are still practicing communion today. So Jesus began the practice of communion with his disciples during a Passover meal. And this Passover setting is significant because this was a holiday that God gave the Jewish people more than 1,000 years earlier, and he did this to remind them of how he had freed them from slavery in Egypt through the 10 plagues. And the Passover meal in particular pointed to that final plague, which was when every firstborn male in Egypt, including livestock, died unless they put the blood of a lamb on their doorposts. So if there was the blood of a sacrificed lamb on their doorpost, the plague passed over that household, skipped that household, hence the term Passover. Even though there were 9 plagues before this and they were relatively minor in comparison, it was only after this 10th plague, this last plague, that the Egyptian Pharaoh agreed to let the Jewish people go. And after the Jewish people were free, God established this Passover festival as an annual reminder of that time, of that event. So the festival began with a meal of lamb, unleavened bread, and bitter herbs. And each part of this meal had some symbolic value to it, symbolic meaning. The lamb, for example, reminded them of how the Passover lamb's sacrifice saved them from the plague. The unleavened bread, which is, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's bread made without yeast. This reminded them of how God freed them because they had to leave hastily in the night and they didn't have time to let their bread rise. And then the bitter herbs, which may have been things like horseradish or romaine, these were a taste memory of how harsh and bitter their lives were when they had been enslaved in Egypt. So those 3 items, lamb, unleavened bread, bitter herbs, these were the only foods that God prescribed for the Passover meal. And if you want to, you can read more about this in Exodus 12. But then later, the Jewish people started adding wine to the Passover meal as well. And specifically, the Jewish Mishnah records the Jews drinking no less than 4 cups of wine at Passover. And in the Jerusalem Talmud, it says that the 4 cups correspond to the 4 promises that God made to the Jewish people in Exodus 6, where he says that he will bring them out, he will deliver them, he will redeem them, and then he will take them to be his people. So it was during this Passover meal that Jesus instituted communion with his disciples. So the Gospel of Luke says, and he, meaning Jesus, took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, his disciples, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." So here Jesus is giving new meaning to the unleavened bread and to the wine that they're familiar with, saying that the bread now represents his body and that the wine now represents his blood, which he said would be poured out for them, or they would interpret that to mean sacrificed for them. And this is connecting him to that Passover lamb. In 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul, he even calls Jesus the Passover lamb. He says, "For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed." Or the disciple Peter says in 1 Peter, "For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ." And it was only a few hours after this meal when Jesus was crucified. So when he spoke about the bread and the wine as his body and his blood, it was with this in mind. He was anticipating his death and giving the meal new meaning in light of it. Okay, I want to read one more description of this night from 1 Corinthians. Paul wrote, "The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes.'" So here we see the addition of Jesus ushering in the new covenant, him telling his disciples to practice communion as a way to remember him and his sacrificial death and that he will come again. So just as the Jewish people remembered God freeing them from Egypt through the Passover meal each year, now Christians, whenever they're getting together to share bread and wine, they are remembering Jesus' sacrificial death and resurrection. If you're a Christian, I would love to know if and how you practice communion in the comments. Last week when we talked about baptism, I gave some comparisons of what different denominations do, but really there's so much variation within every single denomination that I think it's just better to let everyone speak for themselves, and I'm going to join the conversation as well. And of course, if you have any questions about communion or about Christianity in general, put those in the comments too, and I'll do my best to respond there or in a future video. Next time, we're going to go another layer deeper and spend some time exploring what it means that Jesus is our sacrifice, our sacrificial lamb, and why he had to die in the first place. So if you'd like to see that, you are welcome to subscribe to this channel by clicking one of the buttons below this video, and I'll see you then. Bye.